Claressa, you're all on my mind. Oh, Rissa, you're one of a kind. Oh, Rissa, you better watch that married man, girl, because he's playing you, Rissa. He's intensely bad. Oh, Rissa, you don't know what you get. Oh, let me be quiet.
What if the story everyone thought they knew was only halfway true? According to what Tasha K is now claiming, the timeline, the motives, and even the emotional distance between Claressa Shields and Papoose was a lot more complicated and far less straightforward than the public was ever told. And this isn't just about a breakup or a rebound. It's about layers of behavior that only make sense when you look beneath the surface. Tasha isn't presenting a single bombshell. She's exposing a pattern, one where connection didn't end. It paused, shifted, and resurfaced in ways no one expected. According to her new claims, what looked like closure on the outside didn't match what was actually happening behind the scenes. And when the private story doesn't line up with the public one, that's when confusion becomes controversy. Here's the twist. Tasha says this wasn't a simple case of falling out of love. She suggests there were emotional overlaps, undercurrents of strategy, and even delayed realizations that changed the foundation of the relationship long before anyone spoke publicly about it. In other words, things weren't messy because emotions were intense. They were messy because what was felt and what was known were not aligned. And that's where the narrative gets tangled. This isn't gossip. This is interpretation. Pulls on timelines, reactions, behaviors, and silences that suddenly make sense when viewed through the lens of strategy instead of spontaneity. Because when someone stays connected quietly, doesn't quite close chapters cleanly, and seems to circle back with ease, people stop asking, did they love each other? And start asking, did they ever really leave each other at all? Tonight, we're breaking down what Tasha K claims, why fans are reacting so intensely, and why this story may not be about heartbreak but unfinished business. According to Tasha K, the biggest misconception in this story is the idea that the relationship between Claressa Shields and Papoose ended clearly and completely. She argues it didn't, it shifted. And that distinction explains why everything that followed felt confusing, contradictory, and emotionally misaligned. Tasha's claim centers on behavior after the supposed end. According to her, real breakups come with distance. Emotional, physical, and communicative, but what she points out here is a lack of true separation. Connections allegedly stayed warm, conversations didn't fully stop, energy didn't reset. And when emotional access remains open, people don't actually move on, they just rearrange roles. She also highlights how public silence created a false sense of finality. When neither side offered clarity, fans filled the gaps with assumptions of closure. But Tasha says silence didn't mean peace, it meant unfinished business. And unfinished business has a way of resurfacing at the worst possible moments, especially when new relationships or old ties enter the picture. Another layer she emphasizes is timing. According to her, key moments that were framed as after the breakup may have emotionally started before it. That overlap doesn't require physical cheating to be damaging. Emotional overlap alone is enough to blur loyalties and confuse intentions. And once intentions are unclear, everyone involved operates with different assumptions, which is how resentment builds without confrontation. Tasha also points out that Claressa's public confidence masked private uncertainty. According to the claims, strength became a shield, defending the relationship publicly while privately sensing distance created a mismatch that only deepened the fallout later. Because when you defend something you're already questioning, the collapse feels harsher when it finally happens. This is why Tasha insists the relationship wasn't simple. It wasn't love versus no love, it was connection versus clarity. And clarity never fully arrived until actions, not words, forced it. By the end of this part, the takeaway is clear. The breakup didn't hurt because it ended, it hurt because it never fully did. According to Tasha K, the real damage in this situation didn't come from a dramatic ending. It came from emotional overlap that was never acknowledged. She claims the relationship between Claressa Shields and Papoose existed in a grey zone far longer than anyone realized. Not together, not apart, just unresolved. Tasha argues that emotional overlap doesn't need physical cheating to be destructive. It only needs access to conversation, access to reassurance, access to comfort during moments when clarity should have been forming instead. According to her, that access stayed open, which meant neither person was operating with the same understanding of where things truly stood. This is where expectations diverged. Tasha suggests Claressa believed distance meant transition, that time would naturally create separation and clarity. But according to the claims, Papoose may have been emotionally disengaging without fully disconnecting, which creates a power imbalance. One person thinks they're in a pause that will resolve, the other is already repositioning emotionally. And when those two realities collide, the fallout feels sudden, even if it's been building quietly for months. Another detail Tasha emphasizes is defensive loyalty. She claims Claressa publicly defended the relationship longer than the relationship itself was emotionally intact. Not because she was naive, but because she was committed to the version of the relationship she believed in. According to Tasha, that commitment delayed the realization that emotional energy was being redirected elsewhere. This is also where silence becomes misleading. No arguments, no public statements, no clear lines drawn. According to Tasha, that calm didn't signal peace, it signaled avoidance. Avoidance of difficult conversations that would have forced honesty earlier, before damage set in. And avoidance always benefits the person who's already emotionally prepared to move on. By the end of this part, the picture sharpens. This wasn't a breakup that blindsided anyone. It was a slow emotional exit that only one person noticed too late. According to Tasha K., the most overlooked element in this situation isn't emotion, it's power. She claims that while the relationship appeared stable on the surface, control was already moving behind the scenes. Not through arguments or ultimatums, but through who knew more, who was more prepared, and who was already halfway out emotionally. Tasha argues that once emotional overlap sets in, power naturally shifts toward the person who has accepted the ending first. In this case, she claims Papoose had already begun detaching internally while maintaining enough connection to keep things calm. That calm, according to her, wasn't peace, it was management. And management creates the illusion of stability while decisions are being made quietly elsewhere. This is where Claressa's position becomes critical. According to Tasha, Claressa Shields was still operating from a place of alignment, believing that silence meant mutual understanding, and that distance would eventually lead to clarity. But clarity doesn't arrive on its own when only one person is asking the hard questions internally. It arrives when both people are honest at the same time, and Tasha claims that never happened here. She also points out how power shows up in timing. The person who leaves cleanly, transitions quickly, and appears emotionally settled afterward is usually the person who processed the ending long before it was acknowledged. According to Tasha, that's why the aftermath felt so unbalanced. One person was grieving an ending that felt sudden. The other was stepping into familiarity that felt earned. What makes this especially painful, she says, is that nothing explosive happened to signal the shift. No betrayal moment, no clear break, just a gradual redirection of energy that only becomes obvious in hindsight. And hindsight is brutal because it turns quiet moments into evidence. By the end of this part, Tasha's message is clear. The relationship didn't collapse because of drama, it collapsed because power changed hands before truth did. According to Tasha K., once power shifts quietly, the fallout is never loud at first, it's confusing. And confusion is exactly what defined the aftermath between Claressa Shields and Papoose. Not explosive arguments, not public accusations, just a growing sense that reality and perception were no longer aligned. Tasha claims this is why the situation looked messy instead of dramatic. Claressa was responding in real time, processing loss as it happened. Papoose, according to her, was already past the emotional decision point. And when two people are living in different emotional timelines, the breakup doesn't feel mutual, it feels disorienting. One person is trying to understand what changed. The other is relieved the transition is finally visible. This is also why the public reaction intensified after the reunion elsewhere. According to Tasha, that moment didn't cause the pain, it confirmed it. Confirmation hurts more than surprise. Because it forces someone to realize the ending didn't just happen quickly, it had been forming quietly while they were still standing inside it. Another point Tasha stresses is dignity versus clarity. Claressa chose dignity. She didn't rush to expose details, she didn't unravel publicly, she held her composure. But according to Tasha, dignity without clarity leaves space for speculation. And speculation fills the silence when truth isn't shared. That's why the narrative spiraled instead of settling. At this stage, Tasha argues the relationship story stopped being about blame and became about misalignment. Misalignment of timing, misalignment of emotional readiness, misalignment of honesty. And when those misalignments stack up, the ending feels harsher than it had to be, not because anyone was cruel, but because truth arrived too late. By the end of this part, the pattern is clear. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet unraveling that only made sense after it was over. At this point, what Tasha K has really done is force people to stop looking at this as a messy breakup and start seeing it as a case study in emotional misalignment. Because the pain here didn't come from betrayal in the traditional sense, it came from two people operating on completely different timelines without saying it out loud. This story isn't about villains and victims. It's about who knew the ending first. According to the narrative, Claressa Shields was still emotionally invested when the relationship had already begun winding down behind the scenes. She defended, she trusted. She believed distance meant adjustment, not detachment. And when clarity finally arrived, it didn't come through conversation, it came through behavior. On the other side, Papoose appeared emotionally prepared for the transition long before the public saw it. And when someone moves on smoothly while the other is still processing, the aftermath will always look unfair, even if no one thinks they did anything wrong. That's why fans are still debating this. Not because they want drama, but because they recognize the pattern. Quiet exits, emotional overlap, power shifting before truth is shared. These are the breakups that hurt the most because they don't explode, they erode. Now the question is yours. Do you think this situation was doomed the moment honesty lagged behind emotion? Was silence used to protect dignity or to avoid accountability? And when relationships end quietly but restart loudly elsewhere, who carries the real weight of the ending? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Keep it thoughtful, not cruel. If this breakdown helped you understand why this story feels heavier than gossip, like the video so others can find it. Share it if you believe timing reveals more truth than explanations ever could. And subscribe for more long-form breakdowns that go beyond headlines and focus on patterns, power, and what really happens when love and silence stop lining up. Because the hardest breakups aren't the loud ones, they're the ones where the truth arrives after the goodbye.